Welcome to my new hole series, where we examine how late-stage progressivism is turning our once beautiful cities into complete holes, and in the case of San Francisco, a literal hole. Being a bit unfair calling Paris a hole. It's more of a piss hole. London is a citadel of sin for bohemian upper classes, but for most other people, it's turning into a complete hole.
You may be nice, Paul Joseph Watson. I don't know you, but you're intellectually insincere. So I want to talk about these videos you keep making on cities that are supposedly shitholes. And in fact, on the off chance you ever watch this, I'll just talk to you like we're talking to each other. So, assalamu alaikum, Paul. Bienvenue America. Where we have democracy and you still have a queen. Have you been to San Francisco? I think that was your most popular video. San Francisco is a shithole.
San Francisco also has the honor of being America's largest unsupervised outdoor mental hospital.
It's not. It's one of the most vibrant, economically diverse, and growing cities in the United States. That's why so many people move there, want to live there. It's beautiful. You got Sausalito to the north, Marin County, the New Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate. You have Nob Hill and south of Market, the Mission District, Haight-Ashbury, the history of the hippies, and the counterculture revolution. Do you think that's all gone? Because you can point out some homeless people? All big, great cities have homeless people. Los Angeles also has a homeless problem. One could argue even larger, as they have an entire neighborhood called Skid Row. You ever been there? I walked down the streets of Skid Row one time, and it was just lined with tents. Tents, tents, tents. And yet, would you argue Los Angeles is also not a great city? Perhaps home to the largest cultural hegemony in the world, Hollywood?
Now, that's the first point. The second point.
My desire is not to be dismissive. I understand there are negatives and darker aspects to cities, just as there are to all towns. And San Francisco and Paris all have their negatives and drawbacks. There is large amounts of homelessness and income disparity, changes of neighborhoods and gentrification. But cities are complex. Like people, they contain multitudes. And part of imagining cities and people complexly is understanding just because a town has negatives or darker aspects doesn't immediately erase all the positives they can bring to the individual living in that community or to the larger global community in which that city interacts with. Something to think about. Now, what about our European counterparts? Paris. I don't know about you, Paul, but I like to travel. I like to see these places like San Francisco and Paris. But perhaps that's what makes me American and you British. My ancestors were positive and willing to take a risk, an adventure. They moved to America. Yours didn't. Maybe that's why today you're so worried about illegal immigration. It's because your family was too scared to ever immigrate somewhere new and exciting.
See regret in a man's eyes? It's fucking painful.
But I could be wrong. Perhaps your thesis of toxic illegal immigration that poisons every city that allows people in is right. But I don't find it convincing. Paris isn't Paris, as you kept having Donald Trump quote.
Paris is no longer Paris.
Have you been to Paris lately?
Steamy summer's night, the sounds and smells are of Africa. As a white European, I attract odd looks. Where was he visiting? Nigeria? Eritrea? Sudan? No, it was Paris. Specifically the Saint-Denis area, which is home to, wait for it, 300,000 illegal immigrants.
You don't know what you're talking about, do you?
Paris is the same as it's always been. The Champs-de-Mars is still beautiful. Champs-Élysées is a pleasure to walk up. And the cafes in Saint-Germain are still outside and open with people smoking and eating and smiling. It's a very pleasant neighborhood, as it's always been. Just as walking along the Seine is at night, where all the couples have their wine and blankets down hanging out. It's a beautiful town. It always will be.
When a French couple in Paris shouted Vive la France when the country won the World Cup, a gang of Algerian men beat them up.
But that's the thing. I can understand you disliking one city. Perhaps your personality just doesn't vibe with it, Paul. But London, Paris, San Francisco, it seems like you're just picking cities that people love and then trying to dunk on them. Because you know they'll get a lot of views. High searchability, a controversial opinion, and 3, how the historical past is always better than the present or the future. It's such a passé way of looking at the world. Surely you're old enough to recognize that's rarely ever the case.
That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader.
And what about London? You rag on London for 10 minutes before then justifying why you live there. The reasons you give being, well, it's the cultural, economic, political capital of the UK. For better or for worse, I have to be here for work.
Basically, every political event, interview, gathering or protest takes place in London. I kind of have to be here because of what I do.
Yes, it is the cultural, political, economic capital of the UK. Why? Because it's a great historic city that is still great today, full of financial capital and architecture and arts and culture. Shoreditch is still a vibrant neighborhood, as is Soho. They're all great neighborhoods where any person can feel welcome. London, Paris, San Francisco. What's the next video? New York? New York's not a shithole. It's a magical, great place where a young guy can still move here in his car without a degree and live. No, a shithole place is like Somalia, where there's no central government or unifying cohesion that allows basic structure or institutions to develop. It's hard to make great art when there are no roads to get you to the studio. It's hard to make great videos when there's no internet connection, because there's no company to lay the cables. And they don't have the cables because they don't have the money to import them, or the education and technological wherewithal to manufacture them themselves. That's a real shithole place. That's San Francisco. You ended your video by quoting Samuel Johnson, so I'll quote Teddy Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is in the arena, whose face is marred with dust, sweat, and blood, so that his place shall never be by those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. I don't know, just a few thoughts for you, Paul. I'm just a guy in New York City. Perhaps you'll make a video about my town next. I look forward to watching it. Bye.